I still remember the exact moment the room went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows a beautiful toast or a heartfelt speech, but the kind that crashes down like a wave and leaves you gasping. I was sitting there in the third row at my brother's wedding, my hands clenched tight in my lap, my son Mason quietly playing with the corner of his little bow tie beside me. They called for speeches, and Emily, the bride, in her picture-perfect gown and flawless makeup, stood up, her champagne glass sparkling under the chandelier lights. At first she smiled sweetly. I should have known better. She didn't look at me directly, but I knew it was coming. There was something in the way her smile turned sharp. She cleared her throat and said, "You know, weddings bring family together. Even the broken parts. I mean, just look at my new sister-in-law raising a kid on her own, showing up like a discount character from a drama series. It's inspiring." A few scattered chuckles rippled through the crowd. My stomach twisted. I forced a polite smile, even as the words burned. But then came the blow I wasn't ready for. My mother, Dolores, leaned into her wine glass, completely unaware, or maybe fully aware, that the microphone near the head table caught her voice as clear as day. She's like one of those returned items at a yard sale, used, scratched, and somehow still overpriced. And just like that, the entire room erupted. Laughter exploded like glass shattering against stone. Forks paused midair, napkins dropped, and even the string quartet stopped playing. And me? I sat there frozen. I could feel every eye. I couldn't even lift my water glass. My cheeks went hot, and my ears started ringing like someone had smacked both sides of my head at once. Mason looked up at me, wide-eyed and confused. "Mommy, why are they laughing?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't tell him that people sometimes laugh to hurt others. I couldn't tell him that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most, like your own mother, can make you feel like you don't belong. I looked toward the front of the room. My brother Lucas stood there beside his bride, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. Not once did he look at me. Not even a glance. The boy who once sat on the kitchen counter watching me paint his science posters, who cried the day I moved out after college, now stood silent while his new wife mocked me, and his mother joined in. And suddenly all the memories came flooding in. His birthdays I planned, the night I covered for him when he stayed out too late, the 100 times I stood up for him. None of that mattered now. I felt Mason's little hand wrap around my fingers, grounding me for a second. I swallowed hard, the humiliation still thick in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to walk out and never look back. But instead, I sat there, forcing myself to breathe slowly, deeply, as if I held myself together long enough, I could make it to the end of the night. The clapping finally died down and someone moved on to the next speech, but I didn't hear a word. I just kept staring at the centerpieces, the flicker of the candles, trying to distract myself. I thought I had seen the worst life could offer. I thought I had grown strong. But in that moment, surrounded by family, dressed in my best, sitting beside my beautiful son, my heart shattered in a way I didn't know was still possible. And just like that, the entire room erupted. Laughter exploded like glass shattering against stone. Forks paused midair, napkins dropped, and even the string quartet stopped playing. And me? I sat there frozen. I could feel every eye. I couldn't even lift my water glass. My cheeks went hot, and my ears started ringing like someone had smacked both sides of my head at once. Mason looked up at me, wide-eyed and confused. "Mommy, why are they laughing?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't tell him that people sometimes laugh to hurt others. I couldn't tell him that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most, like your own mother, can make you feel like you don't belong. I looked toward the front of the room. My brother Lucas stood there beside his bride, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. Not once did he look at me. Not even a glance. The boy who once sat on the kitchen counter watching me paint his science posters, who cried the day I moved out after college, now stood silent while his new wife mocked me, and his mother joined in. And suddenly all the memories came flooding in. His birthdays I planned, the night I covered for him when he stayed out too late, the 100 times I stood up for him. None of that mattered now. I felt Mason's little hand wrap around my fingers, grounding me for a second. I swallowed hard, the humiliation still thick in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to walk out and never look back. But instead, I sat there, forcing myself to breathe slowly, deeply, as if I held myself together long enough, I could make it to the end of the night. The clapping finally died down, and someone moved on to the next speech, but I didn't hear a word. I just kept staring at the centerpieces, the flicker of the candles, trying to distract myself. I thought I had seen the worst life could offer. I thought I had grown strong. But in that moment, surrounded by family, dressed in my best, sitting beside my beautiful son, my heart shattered in a way I didn't know was still possible. And worst of all, I still hadn't decided whether to get up and leave, or sit through it all, pretending like it hadn't just happened. I barely noticed Mason slipping away from his seat. My mind was still fogged over with the heat of shame, and I was too focused on the burning in my chest to realize he had gotten up. When I did notice, it was already too late. "Mason," I whispered harshly, reaching for his arm, but he was already walking, marching, toward the stage. My heart dropped. My hand hung frozen in the air as my son, only 9 years old, made his way through rows of silent, curious guests, his tiny dress shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. "Mason, come back," I whispered again, this time more urgently. My panic rose fast. I wanted to sink into the floor, to grab him and disappear, to stop whatever he was about to do. But he didn't even turn around. Lucas looked confused as Mason walked right up to the stage. The DJ paused the music again. Emily blinked, caught off guard, clearly not expecting a child to interrupt her perfect day. Lucas bent down and asked something quietly, but Mason only pointed to the microphone. To my shock, my brother gave a small nod and handed it to him. Mason's hands trembled a little, but he held the microphone like he had done it 1,000 times. His voice was soft at first, but clear.
"Hi.
My name is Mason Andrews, and I'm Sarah's son." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few curious whispers passed through the room like wind through tall grass. "I know I'm not supposed to talk during weddings," he said, glancing briefly at Emily. "But I need to say something. Because what happened earlier wasn't okay." My breath caught. My fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth as I tried to stand, but I couldn't move. Mason looked around the room, then back at the bride. "A few days ago, I was at Uncle Lucas's house with Mom. I was reading in the kitchen. I don't think anyone saw me." Emily's posture stiffened, her arms crossing over her stomach. I heard Emily say she doesn't love Uncle Lucas. She said she just wanted someone who'd take care of her. She said she was tired of dating guys who couldn't offer stability, and Lucas was her safest option. Gasps broke out instantly. People looked from Emily to Lucas, some with hands over their mouths, others frowning. My legs went weak. Mason continued, not flinching. "She also said my mom didn't belong here. She called her embarrassing. Said she looked like someone who would ruin the photos. She laughed about how people would talk if a single mom showed up in black." Emily stepped forward quickly, her smile gone. "He's just a kid. He's confused." "That's not true." Mason looked straight at her. "I know what I heard. I wrote it down in my book." Silence fell again, thick and unmoving. Emily's cheeks flushed with color as her mask began to crack. Lucas stood frozen, like the floor beneath him had disappeared. I was stunned. Every part of me wanted to run and shield Mason from the fallout, but I couldn't look away. I was terrified for him, terrified of how this moment would be remembered, but at the same time, something fierce stirred in my chest.
Pride.
Not because he had exposed anyone, but because he had stood up.
For me. For truth.
For kindness. Emily tried again, her voice high and strained. "That's ridiculous. Are we seriously letting a child?" But she didn't finish. The crowd wasn't with her anymore. Some people lowered their eyes. Others stared at her like they didn't recognize her anymore. Mason turned to Lucas. "Uncle Lucas, I'm sorry for saying this, but you needed to know." Lucas's face was pale. He looked like a man who had just woken up inside a nightmare. Mason stepped back from the mic, walked down the steps slowly, and came back toward me. I was already standing now, arms open, and he melted into my hug. The entire room stayed quiet. Not a single fork moved. No music. No clapping. Just stillness, and truth hanging in the air like a chandelier about to fall. I looked down at Mason, brushing a hand over his hair. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "I didn't want them to laugh at you again, Mom." And just like that, whatever shame had been gripping me cracked wide open, and I could finally breathe. For a few breathless moments, the ballroom hung in stunned silence. All eyes were darting between Emily's flushed face, my pale brother Lucas, and my son Mason, who sat now with his head tucked against my shoulder. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest as he tried to stay calm, though I knew he was scared. I rubbed his back gently, still trying to process what had just happened. Then a soft voice rang out from the middle of the room. "I heard it too," said Rachel Kim, one of the guests. She stood slowly, holding a glass of white wine that trembled slightly in her hand. I wasn't going to say anything. I thought maybe I misheard, or maybe it was none of my business, but Noah's telling the truth. I was helping Emily with her veil in the dressing room last week. She said exactly what he just repeated. All heads turned toward her. Rachel swallowed hard. She said Lucas was a safe bet and that she just wanted to marry someone who could give her the lifestyle she deserved. She laughed and said single moms should have enough shame to know when they don't belong at weddings like this. A low murmur rippled through the room. Rachel sat down quickly, her eyes downcast. Emily's face twisted into something unrecognizable, part panic, part anger. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, her voice sharp. "You're siding with a child? He's just making things up. He probably misunderstood a joke." I stood up then, my arms still around Mason. "He doesn't lie," I said firmly. "And Rachel has no reason to back him up unless it's true." Lucas turned to Emily slowly, his expression drained of warmth. "Did you say those things?" Emily's mouth opened, then closed. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Lucas, come on. It's your wedding day. Are we going to let one awkward moment ruin everything? I've been under a lot of pressure. The planning, the guests, the photographers, it's a lot. People vent. They say things they don't mean." "But you meant them," he said quietly. She took a step toward him. "No, look, your sister has always been dramatic. She's probably coached him to say this. You know how jealous she's been since we got engaged." Lucas's face didn't move. His hands stayed clenched at his sides, but his eyes were glassy. "I watched you laugh at her," he said. "I heard Mom humiliate her. And I stayed quiet. I thought I could keep the peace by pretending nothing was wrong. But you," his voice cracked slightly, "you knew what this day meant to me. And you made it into a joke." Emily's lip trembled. "You're seriously going to take their side?" Lucas turned fully now, addressing the entire room. "Sarah has always been there for me. She raised me when Mom couldn't be bothered to cook dinner or check homework. She was my sister and my protector. And just because she's a single mother, you all treated her like she's lesser." He looked at me then, and something in his expression broke. "I should have defended you earlier. I'm sorry." I blinked back tears, barely managing a nod. Emily scoffed, grabbing the hem of her gown. "Fine," she muttered, her voice bitter and shaking. "Enjoy your disaster of a family." And with that, she turned and stormed out of the ballroom, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as gasps and whispers followed her retreat. But no one ran after her. The silence she left behind felt different, heavier, more final. And then someone started clapping. At first, it was just Rachel. Then another guest. And another. The clapping grew louder until the whole room was filled with it. Not applause for Emily's exit, but for Mason.
For his courage.
My son looked up at me, eyes wide. "Why are they clapping?" "Because you did something brave," I whispered, kissing the top of his head. "You told the truth when no one else could." Lucas stepped off the stage and came toward us. He crouched down in front of Mason and held out his hand. "Thank you," he said gently, "for telling me. I should have seen it myself." Mason shook his hand shyly, hiding half his face behind my arm. Lucas looked at me then, eyes full of apology. "I was wrong to let anyone treat you that way. I'm done pretending we're okay just because we all share a last name. I gave him a small, tired smile. Took you long enough. He chuckled, and for the first time in years, I saw the brother I used to know, the one who once stood up for me on the schoolyard, who patched my scraped knees with Spider-Man bandages. Around us, the atmosphere shifted. The judgment, the whispers, the shame. They had all turned into something else now. A room that once laughed at me now stood behind my son, behind the truth. And even though the wedding was crumbling, for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. After the crowd quieted, after the clapping faded and people returned to their seats in an uneasy hush, I sat back down, still holding Mason tightly. My body trembled, not from shame this time, but from the sudden release of everything I'd been holding in for years. I didn't cry right away. For a few minutes, I just breathed, staring down at the half-full glass of water on the table like it held answers. But then the tears came, quiet and heavy, spilling down my cheeks as I bowed my head, shielding Mason from the sight. It wasn't just what had happened today. It was all the birthdays I'd been excluded from, all the family photos I was asked to step out of, all the moments my mother looked right through me while praising someone else, all the silence from Liam whenever I needed him most. It all came flooding up now in waves, but this time it didn't crush me. This time, something in me stood tall above the tide. I felt a hand on my shoulder. When I looked up, Liam was standing beside me. His face was pale and wet with tears I hadn't seen him shed in years. "Can I sit?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He pulled up a chair beside me and looked down at his hands for a long time before speaking. "I don't even know where to start," he said. "You don't have to," I replied, voice hoarse. "No, I do," he said firmly. "Because I let this go on for way too long. I let Mom control the narrative. I stood by while Emily made you feel small. And I can't undo any of that. But I need you to know. I saw Mason today. I saw what it looks like to be brave. I didn't realize how far I drifted until your son reminded me what truth sounds like." I stared at him, hardly recognizing the man in front of me. There was no pride left in his posture, just regret. And something else, maybe love, buried beneath the years of avoidance and silence. He hesitated, then opened his arms.
"Please, Sarah. I'm sorry. For all of it."
I didn't move at first. My heart still throbbed with every bruise he'd ever walked past without acknowledging. But then Mason looked up at me and whispered, "It's okay, Mommy. He means it." And that was all I needed. I leaned forward and let Liam hold me. For the first time in over a decade, I let myself feel the weight of a sibling's arms around me. His embrace was awkward, unsure, but real. We held on to each other like two people trying to stitch a torn photo back together. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and the string lights above the dance floor flickered in the quiet, Liam and I sat on a bench outside the venue while Mason chased fireflies nearby. I kept telling myself that agreeing with Mom was easier than confronting her, Liam admitted, looking up at the stars. I thought keeping the peace meant being neutral. But I wasn't neutral, was I? I was silent. And that silence made you feel invisible. I nodded slowly. "You were never supposed to choose sides.
I just needed you to see me.
To remember who we were before all this."
"I do now," he said.
"And I'm going to do better."
"For you."
"For Mason." "For me." It was quiet for a moment, just the chirping of crickets and the soft tap of Mason's shoes in the grass. Then my phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. It was a text from Mom, short, cold, and calculated as always. "You've caused enough embarrassment today. Don't expect things to be the same anymore." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off the phone and slid it back into my purse without saying a word. "Was it her?" Liam asked gently. I nodded. "It doesn't matter." For the first time in my life, I meant it. I didn't need an apology from her. I didn't need her to see my worth. I didn't need her approval to feel whole. Mason came running back and climbed into my lap, sweaty and smiling, proudly showing me a glowing jar. "They're so pretty, Mom." "They are," I said softly, brushing his hair back. "Just like you." As I looked at my son, this small, fierce heart who stood up in front of a crowd to defend what was right, I realized something I hadn't been able to grasp for years. I wasn't broken. I wasn't discarded. I wasn't a mistake or a stain on anyone's name. I was enough. Not because someone finally apologized,
but because I stopped needing them to.
and in that moment, under the stars with my son in my arms and my brother quietly beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Peace.
We didn't say much as we walked out of the venue. The night air was cool, soft against my face, and the stars blinked gently above us like they knew a secret. Mason held my hand, swinging it a little as we made our way to the car. His small fingers fit perfectly in mine, warm and steady, like they always were. When we got in, I started the engine but didn't pull out right away. The radio was off. The road ahead was quiet. For a moment, we just sat there, wrapped in stillness. Mason turned his head toward me and asked, "Mom, are you okay?" I looked at him. His little suit was wrinkled now, his tie slightly askew, but his eyes were calm, like he already knew the answer. And I realized I was. I nodded.
Yes, sweetheart.
I am. He smiled, leaned back against the seat, and stared out the window like that was all he needed to hear. When we got home, the house felt different. Not bigger, not cleaner, but lighter. I kicked off my heels, still holding the emotional weight of the day somewhere in my shoulders, but it didn't crush me anymore. It just reminded me of how far I'd come. Mason headed to his room and began pulling off his jacket. I followed behind him with a quiet laugh. "Need help with those buttons?" "I got it," he said with a yawn. But halfway through, he gave up and let me finish. Once he was changed and under the covers, I sat beside him and smoothed his blanket out. His eyes were already half closed, his hand tucked under his cheek. "Hey," I whispered, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Thank you for what you did today." He blinked lazily, his voice soft. "I didn't want them to treat you like that." "I know. But standing up like that took courage." He smiled, the sleep already pulling him under.
You taught me that.
And just like that, my throat tightened again, but not with pain this time. With pride. I kissed his forehead and turned off the lamp, letting the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling come to life. As I walked quietly out of the room, I felt something settle in me. A new kind of stillness. Not emptiness, but peace. All these years, I had second-guessed myself. Every judgmental glance, every whisper behind my back, every exclusion, it all chipped away at me. I questioned whether I was enough. Whether being a single mom meant I'd failed. Whether I was raising Mason right without a partner beside me. But tonight answered everything. Mason wasn't just brave. He was kind, thoughtful,
Strong.
and he didn't learn that from watching people like my mother or Emily. He learned it from watching me. And for the first time, I saw myself the way he must have seen me all along, not broken, not unworthy, not difficult or dramatic or less than. Just a woman doing her best. A woman who showed up every day. Who gave love even when it wasn't returned. Who stayed soft even when the world tried to harden her. I didn't lose anything tonight. Not a family that never stood beside me. Not a relationship that was built on pretense and silence. Not a reputation that others tried to define on my behalf. What I gained was something far more lasting. I gained truth. I gained the strength to stand tall without needing to be welcomed into rooms that weren't built for me. And most of all, I gained the quiet, unwavering love of a little boy who didn't see me as someone broken. He saw me as his mother, his safe place, his teacher, his hero, and in his eyes, I was more than enough.